Well, hey there, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. Hope Mother's Day was a great success for you yesterday. Here is the answer to the two questions that were on the open free response, and I'd like to go over those with you. As that's loading up, I did notice that the questions, I found the questions a little challenging to interpret right off the bat. I'm hoping that the ones that they provide you with on Friday are going to be clearer, um, more specific. And I thought that the second question in particular was a little challenging just to interpret what it is that they were asking for. So I'll go over and provide you um, with that those solutions. Question number one dealt with this thing called the Gizmo class and an online purchase class. And the Gizmo class has three methods in it. Get maker, that returns who the manufacturer is of the gizmo. Is electronic, is a boolean, returns a boolean. True, that if it is an electronic gizmo, false otherwise. And then there's an equals method that says if two gizmos are the same. We'll need that for the second question. There is an online purchase class that has an array list of gizmos, and we are to write the count electronics by maker method. And then a second method has adjacent equal pairs. That's looking to see inside that array list, are there two consecutive objects that are the same? That's the dot equals. The count electronics by maker has a string parameter, and our job is to count the number of orders, gizmo orders, there are in that manufacturer that are also electronic. These, as I said, the has adjacent pairs. We're looking at consecutive pairs to make sure that they're not both the same for that. And in part C, this is, we're not writing code. We're just going to describe how to make a method that would return the gizmo of one manufacturer that is the cheapest. That's the intent. No code to write. I almost feel like it would have been easier to write the code than to write the summary of it. So I'm not sure what they're thinking is there, but sure it's something. All right, so here's the algorithm for the count electronics by maker. So I'm counting, so I'm going to create a variable that set it to 0 initially. I'm going to traverse all of the elements in my array list of gizmos, and I got to do two things to check. We're getting the parameter of the manufacturer. I got to make sure that the manufacturer of the next gizmo is the same as the parameter. So that's test number one. The second test to see is it an electronic gizmo? And if both of these things are true, then I want to increment that counter. When I'm done with my loop, I'm going to return the counter. So pretty straightforward, not very complex, pretty simple thing to start with. Here's my code for it. Just a footnote too, as of yet, the College Board has not released their scoring rubric for this. I'm not sure why. I haven't seen it in my little teacher group, and it isn't on the secure documents that I have access to at the College Board. So if they do reveal that, I'll share that with you at this point. This is just my interpretation. You might see an error too, perhaps. In other words, am not able to judge it against what they're saying. Here is the method declaration that we're given. It returns an int, and it has a string as a parameter. I do feel like these names are rather long, and it just makes everything a little bit more clunky. We probably could have come up with better names if you were to ask me. Here's my counter. I'm setting that to 0. I'm going to go through my array list. I'm using a for each loop to do that. I don't need to keep track of which document, which gizmo it is that I'm at, where I'm in, what the index is in that array list. I just want to go through them all. And the index number is not relevant. So here is the first test. I'm going to get the maker of G, compare that to the parameter. I cannot use the double equals because these are both strings. Strings are objects. Objects has to use the dot equals method, not the double equals symbol for that. So I've got the first test, so I've got a particular maker. So I know that I'm inside this if statement, that G is the manufacturer that I'm supposed to be looking for. The second test that I want to do is test to see if G is electronic. So if that is true, and I could end the close parentheses here, so this is a little duplicative, but perhaps it's easier to follow and understand. So it's a nested if, the way that I structured this. If both of these are true, great. Then I want to increment my counter. So the next step is to have counter increase. And that's basically it. I could have done all of this on one line. It would have to be g.getMaker, by the way. So if you can do it on one line, have a closed parentheses on this side too, by the way. That would be the same thing, and the order does not matter. Sometimes it does, sometimes it does not. In this case, I could find out if G is electronic first, and then find out if the maker is correct. That gets in the same place. You have to be careful if you are getting objects and whether they're null and whatnot. So, or divide by zeros. There's reasons why you have to pay attention to the order sometimes. Not in this case. So that's it for my loop. And now that I'm out of the loop, counter has incremented. If none of them are electronic or none of them are by a particular maker, then counter is not going to increment and it's going to be returning a 0. So all I got to do is return 0, have a closed curly, and we're done with that. So that's the solution for part A for that question number 1. Question number 2 asks us to go through the purchases array list and compare pairs, looking to see if 2 are the same, thinking that a user may have ordered the same thing twice if there are 2 that are adjacent. Not sure that's the best test, but that's what they're asking us to do. So I need to traverse that. I'm looking at pairs. So when I'm looking at the first element, I got to make sure that I don't look at number, get the index at -1. And then when I get to the last element, I don't want to look at the one after that. So I have to be careful about just making sure that I've got code that is not going to get a out of bounds exception. My solution was to store 2 temps that are both gizmos, and so create 2 temp variables, and then to compare those, use the dot equals to do that. This is not a requirement, but it seemed like it was a little bit, made the line a little easier to construct. So that was my solution. I tend to overuse those maybe. People might have a criticism of the way that I code. That would be it. All right, so I'm going to call the dot equals method. If that is the case, I'm going to return true. So there's no need to continue searching as long as if there's one that are equal, that one set of pairs that is equal, I'm done. So I'm going to return true if that's the case. If I finish traversing the array and I have not returned true at that point, then I'm going to return false. All right, so that if statement was never true, so they've all got to be false. Here's my solution to it. It's actually not count electrons, it's get adjacent pairs. It returns a true false, has no parameters. And so because it's tempting to use a for each loop, but I do need to know the index because I've got to get the one prior or the one after. So I've got to use a traditional for here. I'm going to start at 1, and that's going to keep me in bounds on that array list. If I start at 1, I can look 1 prior, get 0, I'm all good. When I get to the end, I'm looking at the last element, I'm going to look 1 prior, that's going to be the pair. So that's my solution to how to make sure that I don't have an out of bounds exception. So I'm going to set I to 1, go through while purchase, and it's purchases, by the way. So I think I made an error here that I can refer to purchase singular all the way through. Don't know whether they would ding me for that or no. They haven't on prior exams. So here's the two temps that I create, Gizmo 1 and Gizmo 2. Gizmo 1 is going to be at I minus 1. Again, because I'm starting at 1, I'm going to get, that's going to be 0. That's going to be legit. So now I've got two Gizmo objects, and now I can simply call the 1 dot equals 2. And based on however that's defined, if that is true, if this comes back true, then I want to return true. It's maybe tempting to say, well, oh, I could just return. Sorry about that little technical issue with the headphones. Um, at any rate, so I'm zipping along here. I'm going through, I'm comparing 1 versus 2. The one thing that I would recommend you not do, it's tempting to say if to return 1 dot equals 2, but it would only look at the first element. That would come back false perhaps, and it would exit out. So I can't return, it has to be inside an if statement. Now I'm done with my loop. If I'm outside of the loop, I've gone through all of those elements. I've gotten pairs all the way through. I've examined them all. So I can simply return false if I get to that particular point. Hopefully that makes some sense. And then there's going to be a closed curly at the very end. I think that's it. Let me know if you see any bugs. Part C, they're asking you to summarize how you would modify the code to create one that is going to find the cheapest element of a given manufacturer. So we're not writing it, we're just summarizing. I think this is the fluff piece. I think that it's hard to do, I think, but there's a lot of things that a lot of variables, that ways of getting points, I think. So again, I have not seen the rubric. My guess is you'd be getting points for mentioning different things. You don't have to get them all. So if it's fluff, because if you missed an element, you're not going to be sunk on that. So we're not writing that, with the exception of the heading of the method heading, method signature. We have to kind of describe what we're going to do. But that's it. So the thing that's important is that there's nothing inside the Gizmo class that refers to price. So we're going to need to create a new variable inside a Gizmo object. That's going to be an instance variable. So it's going to be private. What data type should it be? Int makes some sense, I guess. Could be whole dollars, but dollars and cents maybe makes more sense. So in my solution, I had it be a double. It needs to be a constructor that would create that with the price. Take a double as an explicit constructor. Need getters and setters, and then I need to describe the algorithm. Again, and I'm passing a parameter of that. So here's my solution to that. Again, I think they want it in paragraph form. So a paragraph would have been better, perhaps. So again, here's my private price variable. I need to modify the explicit constructor so that it has a double as a parameter, and I can set this new variable, this instance variable, to the parameter. I need to create a getter, probably a setter as well, for that variable. There's nothing in the prompt that says that the price could change, but that seems like a reasonable thing to do. Here's the signature of this. They want us to return, sorry about that. They want us to return the gizmo. They want us to return the object that is the cheapest, not the index in it, which actual one. That gets to be a little bit tricky. In other words, what if none of them uh, was made by a particular manufacturer? What should you return then? Um, so my solution to this was inside this method, you've got to create a temp variable, say call it cheapest. That's going to be set to null. I can't set it to say the first element or a specific element because I don't know if that is the made by that manufacturer. So I'm going to set it to null, and then I'm going to look to see what's the answer. Because of that null part, well, then I've got to determine the first time that I find one by the manufacturer, I've got to actually look and see, is it null or no? I can't get the price of uh, cheapest if there's nothing there. I'd get a null pointer exception. Maybe that makes sense. So, so that was the first thing that I needed to do. And when I was just thinking in my mind, how am I going to go about that? What am I going to set cheapest to? If I'm looking for the max price or the min price, the manufacturer did not matter, I would set max or min to the first element. But because I have to make sure that it's by a specific manufacturer, I don't know that. So that's why I'm going to set it to null. Going to traverse each element for each loop works. Traditional for is also fine. Then I want to compare the manufacturer of the next element with my parameter here. I also need to see, is it equal to null? And if that is the case, so, okay, it's maker and cheapest is not pointing to a specific object, then I found the first element, and so cheapest is going to be set to that. I don't need to compare price. I just need to set it. So that's only the first time that cheapest that manufacturer has been found. So once I have it, okay, now not only do I need to look at who the manufacturer is, but now I also need to look at what's the price of cheapest versus the price of the next element in that array. Um, so if the next element is, yep, it's the same manufacturer, get the price compared to the price of cheapest. If the next element price is in fact cheaper, then I'm going to set cheapest equal to the next element. When I'm done with that, I'm going to return cheapest. If, as I said, if there are none that are by that manufacturer, then I'm going to be returning null. It still is, it's going to compile because cheapest is still, I'm sorry, Gizmo is still being returned even if it's a null pointer. That would need to be checked on the driver end. We're not being asked to do anything with that. We have to return something. So that's the solution, and it will definitely work by uh, returning a null pointer that's pointing to that's theoretically that is a gizmo object. That was a lot of ums and babbling. Hopefully this screen will make some sense to you. Feel free to ask me if you have any questions on that. So that's all of question one. Let's move on to question two. Question two is this thing called a check digit class. We don't know what a check digit is, so you have to read a little bit to kind of figure that out. And it's a way to try to make sure that this number is valid, which is lovely. But again, the description of it is a little challenging. It is, in my opinion. Here are the methods of that. I can get check. That's going to return the digit that of a particular number that's been passed as a parameter. That's an important method that kind of does the heavy lifting for us. We are going to write the is valid. This returns true if the first digit, the ones place, equals the response to this guy, which is the remaining digits of that parameter. Again, I interpreted that from the example that they cited, not through the actual description of what they wrote. So maybe my interpretation's wrong. We can see. Our job is to not do that. I don't think is valid. Oh, I think that's yeah. So we're writing this, and then we're going to describe how to keep track of the number of times that this is called. We don't have to write the code; just describe it. And again, I think that there's a lot of different elements to keep track of. It's just a matter of how many can you mention. All right, so here's the isValid method. This is the one method that we have to write for this. It takes a number as a parameter. And if you look at the description of that, we have to actually split num into two different parts, the ones place and all of the remaining digits. So if the number is 159.2, the ones place is 2 and all of the rest is 159. If the number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the ones place is 5 and the rest of it is 1, 2, 3, 4. So what we want to do is we would pass this to the get check method. That would come back with a number, and then we would want to compare that what is in the ones place with what came back from that is basically what we're looking for. So we're going to store those, call the get check for all the other numbers. That's the 1, 2, 3, 4. In a variable, test to see if the first digit equals the response from get check, and then we return true if that's the case, false otherwise, and that's it. So the tricky part here is how do you split this up? And I think what they're testing is modulus. Do you understand how to use modulus? So how do I get the ones place, and how do I get everything else? There are a couple of coding issues that dealt with this, like, oh, I'm going to take this number and I'm going to keep slicing it off, and you have to get the modulus to do one thing and get divide by 10 to get the rest of it, and yada yada. There's a recursive problem that was based on that. So here's my solution to it. Here is the constructor. So it returns a true false. The name of the method, and again, here's just this. We really could have done a better job with this name. Check num with check digit. Okay, not sure what that means. Again, remember that modulus divides one number by a value and then returns what the remainder is. That is the trick to find out what the ones place is. So the ones is going to equal the parameter to modulus 10. All right, so if it was 159.5, 159.5 modulus 10 is going to return 5. Because the 5 would be the remainder if I divided that by 10. So I've now extracted the ones place and stored that in a temp variable. Just made up another variable, just another temp, rest of num. I want to get all of the numbers that are not started with the tens place and going up. So how do I do that? Int division means that this casting is not necessary, but I think a BlueJ editor actually would give you a warning if you tried to do int division without casting. So I'm going to divide the parameter by 10, and that would typically give us a point. If it was 159.5, if I divided it by 10, it would be 159.5. I just want the 159. I don't want the decimal. So by casting it or doing int division, I would be getting just the whole number. 159.5 divided by 10, as with int division, is going to be 159. So that's how I'm going to acquire the ones place and the rest of that number. So I got to figure out what is that check. And so I'm going to call this dot check, and I take the rest of the number as a way of doing that. I was able to figure that out by looking at the example, not because they explained that particularly well. So now that check is the number that I'm supposed to be evaluating, now I can do a comparison between check and ones. So if ones equals check, these are primitive, so I can use double equals. If that's true, I'm going to return true. Otherwise, I'm going to return false. Could I return ones double equals check? Yep, that works too. You can't see that because it's behind this little deal here. If you that shows up on your screen. So you got to make sure that that return is true. Believe that would be sufficient. If it's not, I think I'm darn close. B is asking us to, all right, so now we want to find the number of calls to is valid that come back false from a given manufacturer. Okay, you have to pay attention. So one of the things that a bunch of you guys asked was, could you go over static? And so in that video from last week, last Monday, I guess, I tried to describe what static is. Static means that it's not, this is a method or a variable that is true for the whole class, not an instance of the class. All of the methods in this check digit number thing, they're static. That means that I can't call in a static context. If I'm in a static method, I can't call an instance variable, all right? Because it's true for all objects of the class, not one thing. So if you have a reference to an instance variable in a static method, it will blow up, all right? You're gonna get an error. So if you notice that I think is a big plus. So this new variable that I make has to be static, and the new method has to be static too. So I'm going to create a new variable. That new variable is going to be a static variable. I described in the video last week, population is a very common variable to be static. If I have a bunch of dinosaurs, each dinosaur has its own health. So d.getHealth is going to get the health of D. But population, that's true for all instances of the class. That means that every dinosaur, D1, D1000, should all return the same number. So I'm not calling it d.getPopulation, I'm calling it dinosaur.getPopulation. It's true for all instances of the class. Let that soak in. Yeah, so there I'm talking about the health, population, just describe that. So I'm going to call the num false. It's got to be static because it's a class variable, not an instance variable. And it's true for all instances of the class, not just for a specific check digit object. That's the crux. When I make it, I'm going to set it to 0. So when I make my population of dinosaurs, when I first write private static int population, I don't assign it in a constructor because it's class, not an instance. So I'll declare it when I'll initialize it when I declare it, which makes those a little bit unique. Well, there should probably be some getters and setters for that too. So I would want to make sure that those get made. And then I'm supposed to modify this is valid. They don't want us to overload it, meaning I'm not passing a number or passing a variable to that. All I want to do is check to see if num false, if this comes, I'm going to increment num false if this comes back as false. So there's an extra thing. In the example that I previously did over here, this is returning true or returning false. I would want to be able to do that here. There's just coincidence that I didn't write return ones double equals false, but you would have to change that in this case. All right. So that was just a lucky guess, a lucky move on my part. So if valid returns false, then I want to make sure that I increment num false by calling the setter, because I can't do that. I may be able to do that inside that class too, but the setter would probably be the way to go. That's the end of my little slide presentation. If I covered those points in my little paragraph, I think that I would get an awful lot of those points. You might look at that and say, oh, you forgot about this. You may be right. So this was my attempt in 15 minutes to come up with a solution. So there you go. I think the staticky thing is going to be what a lot of people are going to miss. The vast majority of examples are in the book and on the AP exam don't deal with static variables. This one did. Who knows what they're going to do on the real test. So that's it. That's all I got. That was kind of a lot, kind of quickly. If that generated some questions, good. So let me know on the schedule. There'll be a link to continue adding questions to that, and be more than happy to answer those on Thursday. And there you go. So hope things are going well. Again, don't hesitate to let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you on the flip side. Bye.